everybody, and welcome back to my channel. So I have a few things to say before I dive right on into this video. I hit my 1-year mark here for this channel on Father's Day, and that was a massive deal for me. We are I think less than 15,000 away from 200,000 subscribers on this channel, and I just want to say thank you guys so much. This work is so incredibly difficult to do. Sometimes I sit here and freak out, like wondering how I'm going to keep on going, but when you guys show me the amount of support that you do and, you know, reach out to me saying kind things, when I see names that I've seen for a year now support my channel and continue to send in suggestions and continue to offer help with any behind the scenes things possible, it makes my heart so incredibly happy, you guys. It has changed my entire life having this channel. It has changed my children's lives. It's changed my husband's life. It has made me have a completely different outlook on absolutely everything, and I feel so fulfilled, which I was really lacking that personally for a very long time before I started this channel. And you know, everything just kind of hit me all at once at the 1-year mark. I remembered filming my first video and researching for my first video, and the first time a parent contacted me, and the first time, you know, I got a hate comment, and the first time that I received an email from one of you guys saying that I had really encouraged you to go into criminal justice. I remember every second of it all, and I would be nowhere without you guys at all. Literally, I would be nowhere. And so I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you. I know as my channel grows, it's harder for me to talk to you guys in the comment section and on Snapchat and Instagram and all the places that I used to try so hard to talk to everybody. So this is my easiest way to get a thank you out to everybody, and know that even if I don't like your comment or respond to everything you post, I see everything possible, and I am so incredibly thankful and grateful for where you guys have let me go with this channel. So now on to the second thing before I dive into this video. I want to remind you guys of my submission form down below. I've been receiving a ton of emails and DMs everywhere with suggestions and in the comment sections of my videos, and because I have so many different platforms, it is absolutely impossible for me to get all the suggestions from those different areas. So to make sure I can spend as much time as possible actually reading into these cases and not going through hundreds of emails, please send in any suggestion that you have into the submission form. It's just this quick little link you can click down below. It has literally all the different boxes that you have to fill out for everything that I need to know about the case. You leave your email just so I can get in contact with you if need be, and that is the most efficient way you can make sure that I get your suggestion. I know a lot of you guys have been getting frustrated lately that I haven't covered specific cases you've suggested, but I just checked the other day while going through the spreadsheet. At this point, I have a couple thousand suggestions, so I'm working through them as fast as I possibly can, I promise. Just hang in there with me because I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, and it may take a while for me to get to it, but I'm going to get to it eventually, I promise. Now we can finally get into today's case, and today's case is a pretty old one, and it's the disappearance of Sara Bushland. When I looked into this, I was heartbroken at the lack of exposure. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. So Sara Bushland was last seen at the age of 15 on April 3rd, 1996. Just 2 years prior to her disappearance, Sara had moved to Spooner, Wisconsin with her mother Marie, her stepfather Jim Lambert, and her 2 stepbrothers. Now, her parents had divorced when she was a toddler, and from what I have seen, she spent a lot of the time with her biological father, sister, and Chippewa Falls. But for one reason or another, she decided she wanted to move in with her mother and stepfather. Now, after she moved in with them, she started experiencing quite a few bits of teenage struggles. As I said, she was 15 years old at the time, but she was hanging out with a much older crowd, and she had a boyfriend that was around 21 years old, I believe. So she was really putting herself into situations where there are large maturity differences, they have very different interests, and she was being influenced by their lifestyle choices, but but it was really confusing her because she was 15. She had her own set of interests that were very different than this older crowd's, but she was trying to fit in with them and do the same things as them. So she really started having some behavioral issues. She was acting out every once in a while, and this constantly landed her in trouble with her mother and her stepfather. Now, she had a diary where she kept all of these different frustrations written down in, and through reading the diary, it was very obvious that she was very conflicted and very confused. She didn't understand her relationship with her boyfriend. She didn't understand her relationship that she had with her mother and her stepfather and her stepbrothers. It was just a time where she was very confused, and she was in this experimental phase, didn't know which way to go, and she was struggling with that. And this diary was her way of releasing it without feeling like she was being judged for her actions. That was until her stepfather actually found her journal and read through all of it, and he was infuriated at some of the things she had written down in there. So her stepfather and mother decided to punish her by basically grounding her and confining her to their house for weeks. She was only allowed to go to school, but then she had to come straight home and stay in this house. The other rule that they had was that she was no longer allowed to see her boyfriend until she was 16, which would happen in August. But I saw other things that said she just wasn't allowed to see him until she was 16, so a little bit of conflicting information here. You'll see why there's very sparse and very conflicting information in a little bit. But her weeks-long punishment was actually set to end Easter weekend, which was right when she disappeared. And she was so incredibly excited about this. She planned on seeing her boyfriend despite her parents' objections to this, and I'm assuming behind their back she planned on spending time with her friends. She was excited for Easter break. So on April 3rd, 1996, Sara woke up that morning and her stepbrother gave her a ride to her friend's house. Her friend and her decided they were going to walk to school that day. They had huge plans for that night. They obviously were going to school together, they were going to go to school, and then they were both supposed to come home together back to Sara's friend's house. They planned on hanging out there for a little while, and then they were going to get ready for some sort of school event that night. It might have been a dance, maybe it was some like school party, but she was really excited about this because it was finally something she was able to go to after being grounded for weeks. Sara's parents were actually going to be out of town that night, both of them. Jim was supposed to go to Stillwater. One of his friends from Canada was coming down, and they both planned to stay with one of his friends in Stillwater, Minnesota for the night. Marie was going to a funeral that day in Chippewa Falls, and Marie planned on staying at her mother's house that night, so both parents would be out of the house for the night, both set to come back the following morning on April the 4th. So Sara went to school as planned, walked with her friend, and then at lunchtime she actually met with her boyfriend. Now, again, conflicting information. I'm guessing from what I've seen, he picked her up and took her back to his apartment. I've seen some sources say that she actually broke up with him during this lunch period, but I have only seen a few say that, and a few just said they went to see each other behind her parents' backs. Either way, he dropped her back off at school, but when she got back to school after lunch, there was this major shift in her attitude. And according to her friends, she had totally changed her plans. She was not going to any of the events that night. She was not going home with her friend. She was panicked and wanted to go home. And the reason she wanted to go home is because she was worried her stepfather Jim would get into her diary. Apparently, some of the entries she had made in the past couple of days, she started freaking out about and thought if he were to read it, he would be absolutely infuriated and she would end up grounded again. So she started calling and contacting anyone she possibly could, trying to get a ride home. She didn't want to ride the bus home because she knew for a fact she would get there too late, and she wanted to get there as soon as possible, but unfortunately no one was able to give her a ride, so she was left with no other option but to take the school bus home. The bus arrived at her home that day at around 4 p.m. and witnesses on the bus did see her get off at her stop at the very end of her driveway and witnessed her start walking up her driveway. As the bus started to pull away, a truck pulled into her driveway right behind her, and according to some witnesses on the bus, this truck had been following the bus the entire drive. So this truck pulled up behind her. People say it was a dark green or a dark gray, some sort of darker truck, and Sara walked right up to the truck. The people in the bus believed it obviously had to be someone that she knew, and at least one witness claimed that she actually got into this truck and the truck drove off, and this would be the last time anyone would see Sara Bushland. At around 4:37 p.m., so roughly 40 minutes after the bus arrived at Sarah's home, her stepbrother realized she never came home. So he decided to call his dad, Jim, in Stillwater, Minnesota, to let him know that Sarah never got home from school that day. Jim panicked and obviously called Marie, and Marie panicked, so she immediately left Chippewa Falls to come home and figure out where exactly Sarah was. So she got home at around 6:30 p.m. that day and started calling every person she could. And no one had seen Sarah since school that day. So around 8 p.m. when she had no news, she decided to head over to Sarah's friend's house in hopes that Sarah was just there, didn't want to come home. But when she got there, Sarah wasn't there either. So Sarah's friend and her mother Marie decided to go and check her boyfriend's apartment. But when they got there, he claimed he hadn't seen her since lunch that day and she was nowhere in his apartment. So their next stop was his father's house in Trega, just a few minutes away, and they checked there as well, thinking maybe she was hiding from them, but she wasn't there either. Jim and his friends decided to stay in Stillwater until the next day, so he continued out his plans as normal, and then around noon on April the 4th, he came home, and him along with Marie decided to file Sarah as a missing person. Pretty much nothing was done in Sarah's case for the following years because she was treated as a runaway. Kids at the school didn't even know she was missing until weeks later when someone finally decided to put missing persons posters up for her in the school. There was little to no news about her disappearance, and then finally in 1999 the investigation started on looking for Sarah. So 3 years later, 3 whole years, no one but her family essentially was searching for her. Almost immediately into looking into Sarah's disappearance in 1999, the focus zoned right into the Lambert family. And the first of 4 massive searches was conducted on their property in July of 1999. They searched a dump site on the property during this search. They searched all of the house, they searched all of the outbuildings, but they never released to the public what led them here, why they immediately zoned in on the Lambert family. The authorities didn't even say if it was because they suspected someone in the family had something to do with her disappearance, or if they just believed because she was last known to be on their land, that's why they decided to search. But the family was completely cooperative during this search and all of their following searches. In August of 2000, a second search was conducted where authorities decided they would be dragging the lake on the property. And in 2011, sheriffs decided to call in a cold case team that spent 2 weeks going through every single file. They re-interviewed family, they re-interviewed friends, but still, they didn't uncover anything new in Sarah's case. And then on May 16th and May 17th of 2013, the largest search was held on the property. They brought in all sorts of aides to help them in searching the property. Dogs were brought in as well, and interestingly enough, they reacted to multiple different spots inside the home, on the outbuildings, and on the property. But again, authorities didn't say what they believed was the cause of this. And then unfortunately in 2017, both Jim and Marie passed away, but authorities still kept going despite this. They even did one search only a week after Jim had passed. Yet authorities are still keeping very tight-lipped on what they think happened. They are not really speaking on why they keep going back to the Lambert property. They are not saying what they think of the dogs reacting to the different places. But to me, it's pretty obvious, since they keep searching this area over and over again, that they do believe she did not get in this truck and drive away. Something happened to her actually on this property. Now, I do know one of the brothers, they haven't accounted for when he left school, when he got home, what he did after school. I don't know if they maybe think he was involved, but at this point, the Wisconsin Department of Justice, the FBI, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are all working together to really get this case solved, because apparently they haven't had an unsolved homicide case in 30 years, according to one article that I read. So this is definitely something that they want to have closure on. They keep her case on their desk at all times. They don't want this one to just disappear. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that for so long they had treated this like a runaway, and I understand where they were coming from. She was hanging out with an older crowd. She would have had access access to people that could take care of her, that could give her a ride somewhere. She had all of these really conflicted posts in her journal, which I personally have not read on. I don't know if they have that in evidence exactly, but she did seem to be going through something. And, you know, her parents had just told her to break up with her boyfriend. There's just a lot of reasons why I'll get more into the whole runaway theory later on, but I see why authorities treated it as that. But I feel like when it's a 15-year-old that goes missing, there needs to be something done immediately. Despite the fact that they thought she was a runaway, it still needs to be verified a bit more than just, oh, well, that's what we think. But authorities have come back and said later that there are very different bits of protocol now that do make them look into things closer. But back then, if you were a runaway at that age, you were just a runaway and no one really thought much of it. I've also seen that her disappearance is very similar to an 18-year-old girl that disappeared and was murdered, and her body was later found. And this girl's name was Crystal, and I think her last name is pronounced Sawyers. Crystal actually disappeared just a few months after Sara did, and it was kind of similar circumstances. But the thing that makes it most interesting is that they both looked very similar and they both knew each other and hung out with the same group of friends. So as I stated before, Sara hung out with a much older crowd, and this crowd mainly consisted of these two different rival groups of males that were all in their early 20s. And there was a group of girls that all were acquaintances, and they kind of just went to whichever party was happening at the moment. These young 20-year-old men would throw these parties, there'd be drinking and all sorts of stuff happening, and these girls would just kind of bounce around from different party to party. And despite the fact that these two groups were rivals, apparently, according to some, they had no issues with the females doing this. But it was very interesting that these two girls knew each other. These two girls hung out with the same groups of people in this very small town, and they both disappeared very odd circumstances. But authorities said they had no reason to believe that these cases were connected. Now, one of the most heartbreaking bits of information about this entire case is its lack of exposure. The news wasn't covering it. At first, authorities weren't even searching for her. And once things did finally start moving in the case, news outlets didn't want to cover it anymore. It was an older case. It wasn't as interesting anymore. I know that America's Most Wanted was contacted along with a few other shows by Sara's family in hopes of possibly bringing in new information and maybe running an episode on what exactly happened to her would jog someone's memory or make someone feel pressure to come forward and admit to something. But it's like her story didn't have enough pizzazz, so no one would cover it. The fact that a story has to be absolutely wild for any sort of media source to care about it for longer than a split second is absolutely heartbreaking, because everyone, including authorities and her family, can say for 100% fact that whoever took her or had something to do with her disappearance was someone that she knew and someone that she trusted, and 100% was someone from Spooner. So the fact that they couldn't get that information out there to encourage other people to come forward, that could have drastically changed her case, but I guess it just wasn't interesting enough for people. There is a $5,000 reward that is being offered in hopes of new information that leads to whatever happened to her or possibly to her remains. Her family at this point does not believe she is alive any longer, and the authorities also do not believe she is alive any longer, but they're looking for these last few pieces to this puzzle to figure out what exactly happened to her and where she went. So now I'm going to hop into the theories, and there is this giant theory that even authorities had that she ran away. Her stepfather and her mom had just grounded her for weeks. They just read her diary that held her most deep secrets, and they told her she had to break up with her boyfriend or not see him until she was 16. Again, conflicting stories, so I'm not sure exactly which it was, but as a 15-year-old, that's world crushing. You know, when you're that age, you're not thinking that, you know, you've got this whole entire life ahead of you, you've got all these other things to look forward to. What is your world is what's in front of you at that moment, and that's usually your friends, that's usually your social life, and that's usually your boyfriend. Teenagers tend to get very, very upset when those things that are so important to them are taken away from them. And because, you know, teenagers are very naive and they're very self-centered and we don't look a lot into the future, it can drastically impact our decisions, such as to run away. So I get where people are coming from. I also understand that she all of a sudden was terrified that her stepfather was going to read her diary. So, you know, maybe she was like, I can't do it again. I can't be grounded again. I cannot live under the rules anymore. I don't want to be taken away from my boyfriend. So maybe that encouraged her to run away. However, she had some pretty set plans. So to me, that would indicate that this was a very last minute decision to run away, because earlier that morning she was going to her friend's house. She was going to a little school party that night. She had all these plans of things that she wanted to do. She clearly had things she was looking forward to, and that doesn't necessarily scream someone that wants to run away. Now, one thing that I do find very, very odd is that she felt the need to panic over her diary, despite the fact that Jim wasn't even going to be home that night and wouldn't be home till midday the next day. Why would she need all of a sudden to cancel all of her plans that night to go home and get this diary when he wasn't even going to be there? On top of that, once she finally did get home and the sole purpose of her being there was to get her diary, she never actually ended up going inside. So either she got in the truck or she wandered off. But why would she do either of those if she really was this upset about her diary? That's why I believe it was maybe a last minute run while you can scenario, if this runaway theory is a plausible one. However, again, being so young, that would be incredibly difficult for her to pull off. Her boyfriend's house was checked. Her boyfriend's father's house was checked. I feel like if she were planning on running away, she would have just done it. If this was something that was in the works for a while, she wouldn't have gone home first. She wouldn't have been stressed about this diary. So I definitely do believe there is a possibility that she ran away. I just think it would be very difficult to stay hidden for such a long period of time, especially when cold case specialist came in and questioned everyone again. So this leads me into something odd that I found about the stepbrother calling his father about when it came to Sara not coming home. So she had plans and she wasn't expected to come home that night. You know, she was only 15. I am sure she told her family, and I'm sure she told her stepbrother, since he's the one who drove her to her friend's house that day, that she wasn't going to be home that night. So I find it interesting that within 30 minutes of her not getting off the bus, there was this extreme mass panic. Why would that panic be necessary if everyone knew she was going somewhere that night? Something about that just kind of strikes odd to me. You know, there's always a possibility though that he was one of the people that she called to get a ride from to come home. So he was expecting her home, or maybe she didn't tell her family about her plans. But I just think it's very, very strange, because her mother quickly came home and reacted as if she didn't expect her to be out that night. Jim quickly reacted as if he didn't expect her to be out that night. So did she just not tell anyone that she was planning on going out that night? Obviously had to tell someone that that was her plan, since that's part of this story. A woman named Sandra Koshow looked into Sara's case because she was looking at her own niece's case and started looking deeper into everyone else's case, and decided that she really wanted to work towards getting some sort of resolution. And she was actually from Spooner, so she had a very hands-on experience. She also was the one who spotted the similarities between Sara's disappearance and Crystal's disappearance. She was able to question a lot of Sara's friends. She was able to question a lot of Crystal's friends. She found most of the names of these young men from these two different rival groups. But I feel like the other largest theory is that somehow the men from these groups had something to do with it. It's pretty much the only other large theory other than her running away. But according to other females that were friends of Sara's and Crystal's and these two rival male groups, they never felt unsafe. These men protected them. These young men never made them feel uncomfortable. They never felt like they were in any sort of harm's way, and they never believed these men would ever put a hand on any of them. So that alone really says a lot about these young men. So what would their reasoning be for harming her? However, she also needed a ride that day, and she was picked up by someone with a license, and I'm sure they were probably some of the few people that she knew that had it and the first people she would turn to for help. She looked in deeper, and at the time of Sara's disappearance, almost every single one of these men would have had access to a truck. And according to the Bushland family, a few of these men came forward right after Sara's disappearance to the family and said, hey, oh yeah, we saw her in these different cities just hanging around. So they seemed to be wanting to let the family know that she was out there somewhere and had just run away, which to others looked incredibly suspicious. Like they wanted the family to believe she was out there to get attention away from themselves. I personally just find it very, very odd that in a very small town, and I want to say this town had a population of maybe 1,000 to 2,000 during this time frame, 2 girls disappeared within 5 months of each other in very similar ways, and they were both friends in the same friend group. And something about this is just way too coincidental for me. Authorities have said they believe it is someone in Spooner, and it is definitely someone that she knew. She never would have gotten into the car with a stranger. A stranger wouldn't have even ended up in her driveway, and witnesses on the bus have said it appeared as if she knew this person. So that right there alone says this is someone that she knew. It's someone that she trusted. And on top of that, she chose to leave this diary that she was so stressed out about in this home to go somewhere with this person, which means this person was worth leaving this diary behind that could have resulted in her having weeks more of being confined to her home and punishment. So this is definitely someone that was very, very close to her that picked her up last. This case just breaks my heart because it's such an example of when cases are just ignored and the flaws in the system and the fact that runaways are labeled as that despite having very little information that supports that argument. I know there are quite a few people out there that do believe the Lamberts were involved in one way or another, but according to authorities, they were very willing to have everything searched. But at the same time, you know, if she did get in this truck and leave, this big theory that so far no one can prove as 100% fact that she did leave this property, why did the dogs pick up on multiple different areas in the home? You know, if something happened to her on that property, the brother, I'm sure, would have heard it. She would have been screaming. There would have been some sort of scene. And the fact that the brother saw and heard nothing, the whole thing is just very, very odd to me. So I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen to Sara's story. Please send your thoughts out to her family that is still sitting and waiting for any sort of answers they can possibly get. Hopefully some sort of public push in the area will eventually lead someone to come forward with some bit of information, whether it's that they did something to her or they helped her run away. Her family desperately needs closure. Her sister is the one who runs the Facebook page, if I'm not mistaken, and her father is still actively trying to stay on top of this case. So definitely keep them in your thoughts. I have all the numbers listed down below if anyone has any information. There are always anonymous ways to call. Keep that in mind. You can always do something anonymous. If you are scared there's going to be some sort of backlash against you, if you are scared to have your name involved, please at least call anonymously. But thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Howlin' fam, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!